Hello, you're currently balanced on a fence post. It's about to rain. I have nowhere else to film because my new apartment, we don't have lights, we don't have a fridge. I did buy a banjo-lele, so I do have some good priorities. Anyway, what you're about to see is a conversation between Merphy and I as part of our buddy read of Yotsuba To, my favorite manga of all time. Now, I realized that I didn't actually set up this manga at all at the start of our conversation, so I'm just doing that very quickly right now. Yotsuba To, wonderful little slice of life manga about a little girl as she moves into the suburbs of Tokyo, presumably Tokyo, with her father. It is just an encapsulation to me of the joys of being a parent. So I invited Merphy to read it with me from the parental perspective, right? Because we're both parents. And I thought it would be interesting to get someone else's perspective who is a parent to young people about this manga. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the conversation that is to follow. The next thing you should be seeing is Merphy hiding under her table. So I'll see you later. Goodbye.
Oh, that was unfortunate, wasn't it? Well, I'm going to talk about Yotsuba by myself.
Go ahead.
Hello, Merphy Napier. How are you doing?
Oh, hey, how's it going? I'm actually Merphy Yotsuba.
Merphy Suba, exclamation mark, and. Right, before we get going, I know most people will know who you are, but could you introduce yourself, if for no one else, for my grandmother who might not know who you are?
Hey, Grandma. I'm Merphy. I read novels and manga and talk about them sometimes. This is David. He's my friend.
My grandmother does know who I am, just to clarify.
Okay.
Right. The reason that I wanted to have you on, Merphy, is we're going to be talking about. I have a physical copy because I live in Japan of Yotsuba To, which I made a video on a few months ago, kind of halfway through starting my channel. If now is the end point, which hopefully it's not. And I adore this manga. I adore this manga to pieces, mostly because of the main character. And I sent Merphy a message a wee while ago asking if you wanted to read it with me. Primarily, well, first of all, because I like you, but second of all, because I think it's really good to talk about this from the parent's perspective, right? I do think that discussing this manga from the parental perspective is really important, because what it is it's a slice of life manga about a little girl who hangs out with her dad and goes on adventures. And I love it. I love it to pieces. And I can never quite articulate why I love it, but I do. And so, Merphy, I know that you're probably been overcome with joy from reading The Golden Age, which, as we all know, is the happiest part of the happiest manga of all time. Did you mean
depression?
Say again?
Did you mean depression? Because I'm depressed.
Yeah, maybe depression is a better word than overcome with joy. But I think it would be a good palate cleanser as well, Yotsuba. So my question for you, just to kick us off, is how did you find reading volumes 1 through 4 of Yotsuba To?
Okay, so I find Yotsuba incredibly charming. She is such a little kid, like in so many ways. The way that she reacts to the adults around her, the way she miscommunicates and misunderstands, and how that causes not really friction so much as just like confusion. But everyone around her also just sort of rolls with it. You know, you can see that there's so much love for her that when there are miscommunications or when she goes into her imagination and she's like, you know what? I'm seeking revenge. I have to kill people. You know, and she pulls out her water gun and she starts hunting people down and spraying people, like walks into her neighbor's house and sprays her in the face as a greeting and then demands to know where someone else is. You know, like the escapades that a child gets up to when they're lost in their mind or something as absent-minded as, okay, you tell me not to leave you, but look, food. Now you've been left, right? And so now it turns into a lesson. Like little things like this that feel so much like what it's like to raise a child, like what it is to have a little child in your life that thinks so truly with their heart, but not always thinks through anything fully in their mind, and it's very impulsive, very joyful.
I think I've been screenshotting the same parts as you have, because the water gun for me is also just a brilliant one. Listen, before we get into this, I don't know how to discuss Yotsuba without doing spoilers, so we're just going to pretend like it's kind of spoiler filled and spoiler free, because how can you spoil like a little kid eating ice cream? I think we're just going to go for it, mate. But I'm so
sorry. I should have clarified first. Should I go into rambles?
I'll put something in. Don't worry. But like, can you spoil slice of life? I guess that's a good question. But I love what you said and I can't get too excited or the neighbor's going to bang on the wall. But oh my goodness, see, right, personal time. 3 minutes into our call, personal time. Okay, when I found out I was going to become a father, especially from other men, I got the same line over and over and over, or some kind of permutation of the same line, something along the lines of, "Okay, so say goodbye to your life,"
Huh.
or yeah, or say goodbye to your sleep, and everything is kind
Oh,
of
I get
couched.
that one.
Yes. Yeah, which is true, but it's all couched in this kind of language of you are going to regret this at some point, right? It's all couched in this sort of you might have made the wrong choice and you're going to find out shortly. That's the quality of the verbiage I received, right? And what I love about Yotsuba so much, is that maybe sometimes it's a bit idealized, but it always feels like the most joyful, you used that word joy, the most joyful representation of what it is to have a small family. And I think that
Yeah.
just comes off the page pretty much every single chapter. And it is why I wanted to talk with you about it.
It's funny, you and I, in our personal conversations, we've had sort of a similar conversation around marriage as well, where it's like you enter into marriage, people are like, marriage is hard. And it's like, there's this expectation set, and you can cut this if you don't want it in the conversation. There's this expectation set where I think a lot of times it's easy for us to focus in on the difficulties of marriage, of parenting, of work life, of anything. Like it's easy to just zoom in on that and miss the daily joy of monotony. Like Yotsuba is going fishing or going to the zoo or lost in her imagination, or going to find a souvenir at the park and then forgets to find the souvenir for a little while and just plays, like simple joys that a child discovers in life and that a parent has the opportunity to discover alongside of them. And it's
Yes.
easy for us to forget to embrace those simple joys that we get to experience alongside of our child. And Yotsuba reminds us of those.
We're gonna keep this in so I can use this as an opportunity to tell my wife she's magnificent. I haven't seen my wife for 4 or 5 weeks, and she has the kids, which is partly why this is so emotional for me, because I'm sitting here longing for my family. I totally agree with what you're saying, and I also like that with Yotsuba, and I'm going to dig into a couple of instances now. But one thing I also really like about Yotsuba is it reframes stuff and makes you examine it in a new lens. And sometimes it's the lens of how a child is experiencing things for the first time, as you said, but sometimes it's just also the reality. And one of my favorite instances of this is the global warming section,
Oh,
which I
sure.
think is in first volume.
Yes,
Um,
it is.
and I love that to pieces because basically Yotsuba discovers, a 6-year-old girl discovers what global warming is. And she just panics
Oh,
because
yeah, she's overwhelmed. She has to go
because
save the world.
yeah, quite right. I think we've got the future Greta Thunberg lives in Japan, and she's got green hair. I love this moment because she's right. She discovers what global warming is, and she kind of punches through and kind of goes, "This is an existential threat to our reality," and basically goes around the neighborhood scolding everyone who has their aircon on. And I love that moment because okay, she takes it to like the upper degrees of kind of social propriety, but she's not wrong. She kind of takes this thing that is in, how can I phrase this? She takes this thing that is a genuine issue that we sometimes as adults brush to the side, and she pushes it back to the forefront. And it's one of my favorite moments because I don't think she's wrong, and I think that's another reason I do like Yotsuba is this reframing of stuff that actually is the most important. I don't know if there's any kind of I don't know if that one was key to you, or if there were any other kind of similar passages, if I can call them passages, that stuck out.
It's for that one in particular, it's also the childlikeness of it where she's just like, "Oh, problem. We should solve it right now." And like does this very straightforward way, and even with her dad, he doesn't have the air conditioner on, and she goes and she's like, "Do you have an air conditioner?" And he's like, "Yeah, we have one just there." And she's like, "I've misjudged you," just like this whole, but then she ends up misunderstanding how to help global warming and ends up like turning on the air conditioning and opens up the fridge and all these things too. So it has those things, but it also still frames it through a child's mind of just, I have this great intent. I desire to do what's right, but also no framing, no context around how to do it or how to move from here, and really does rely on the adults in her life to either guide her or, just embrace the childlikeness, which I think they do a lot of times too. When she is on one of her rampages, even when she's trying to be artistic, and they're just like, "It's good, you're doing great," and then one person tells her, "No, it's not so good," and it devastates her, and they all have to kind of play along and figure out how to keep her innocence, probably the wrong word, keep her childlikeness intact and not, devastate her just because she's a child doing art. And so there's always that kind of balance for them as well. Like, how much do we guide here and how much do we embrace her beautiful child's heart?
Yes, I think there's some really good instances with that. But another thing that I really love, just kind of continuing that conversation, and it's something that I really feel as a father, and something, to be honest, as a father, I take too far sometimes, is it's not only that you embrace this little girl continuing to be a little girl, but there's also a thing of, as a parent, when you see your child experiencing these things for the first time, you kind of jump on board. And so there's an example of Yotsuba kind of standing up. See if I can find the panel. Yotsuba sort of at the foot of this massive set of stairs that leads up to a shrine. And I think
Yes.
this is in the first volume as well. And Yotsuba kind of looks at her dad and she goes, "I'll race you." And she starts to climb the stairs. And what does the dad do? The dad is having none of it. And he just charges right to the top of those stairs and beats his little girl in a race.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, she doesn't seem to mind too much. But this is something that I very much accord with as a father. When my kid, or one of my children, because I have two, gives me some sort of challenge, it's very hard for me to resist. And sometimes I take it too far. Like, my son will be like, "I challenge you to go up that escalator the wrong way around." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, game on." And it's only after like 2 minutes, and my wife kind of looking at me like, "Oh, I probably shouldn't have done that." But I love this idea of parenthood allowing us an opportunity to return to what it was like to be at this age, even if it's just from like a 10% angle.
That's a good point. That's a good point, because they do pause. They're all the adults are working adults. Dad is frequently tired, giving so much to work. Yotsuba is left to go to the neighbors or go out, play out on the streets while he's, trying to be a single dad. And you can tell that it takes a lot out of him, all of these responsibilities that he has. Yet we see them pause life to either embrace the challenge or to embrace some sort of adventure, going to the zoo or something simple like that, and just take the day to enjoy these children that they have in their lives. Not just Yotsuba, but the neighbor kids too. They take them along and just enjoy a quiet community moment, instead of always needing to be busy or always needing to be productive or completely detaching, from everything when they actually have downtime and just taking care of themselves. They're like, no, there's joy in this as well.
I struggle with that. We're going to make this
Me
my therapy session, Merphy. The first thing I do is I wake up and I make a to-do list. And I have to catch myself, because sometimes my daughter, who's she's two, and she'll come up to me with like a book or a puzzle, and she'll go, "Dad, a puzzle now?" And I'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, according to my to-do list, I have to make a phone call to the bank just now." And it's only like an hour later, and again, my wonderful wife going, "What are you doing?" Like, she is two for a finite amount of time. Believe it or not, she's two for a year. That is the finite amount of time. It's kind of set in stone. And it's a good exercise in reframing, I think, that Yotsuba does, where it does kind of centralize what's important, and it's not calling the bank, and it's not going to the shops that minute, and it's something that I struggle with, and I do think Yotsuba is a good reminder there.
I struggle with that a lot too, because we do have so much on our plates that it's like these things feel so urgent to us, and our children feel fixed, but
Yes.
they're not. Especially at the age that they're at, they're not. And pausing and embracing, the other things actually aren't as important as they feel in our minds. Some of them are, but embracing it. This is rest too, and isolation, or getting everything done, and getting all those checks marked off. These things are always going to be there, but this child, will not always. And finding that balance, it doesn't mean that forsake responsibilities for the child, nor does it mean forsake child for the responsibilities. And Yotsuba does show the balance of those. It doesn't pretend like they don't have responsibilities, but it does showcase them embracing the children.
Do you ever do that thing where you look through your phone at pictures of your children, and you'll go back like 2 years, and they'll look different. They'll look weird, and I don't mean that offensively. If my child ever watches this years down the line, I don't mean that they look weird. Although my daughter was a newborn, perhaps, but like there's this thing where it's like they've changed, and you don't notice the change. You don't notice it until it's happened, and it's actually pretty terrifying. I mean, it's a really good marker of how fast everything goes is when you see a picture of your child from a year ago.
I do, and I probably have the wrong answer here. The truth is, when I look back at young pictures of my children, I'm like, oh, that's foreign to me. That doesn't seem right, because like the stage that they're at now is always my favorite stage. Okay. And so maybe when they're in middle school, I'll change my mind on that. But so far, my experience has been the stage that they're at now is my favorite stage. And so when I look back at them, when I loved them so much when they were so little. But now I look back and I'm like, I don't want that back. I love this. This is so fun and exciting, Yeah. I don't know. But yes, it does move fast.
I think that's right, though. And I've kind of said the same thing to my wife. I'm like, I think mine are 4 and 2. And I love 4 and 2. But one thing I love about 4 and 2 is because of everything that's laid before, that kind of groundwork. Yeah. We'll get back to Yotsuba in a minute. But the groundwork has almost been laid in those earlier stages, and it's enjoying watching them come on from the weeks to the months. That is just fantastic. Yeah. Are there any things in Yotsuba? So we're talking about all the joy of Yotsuba, and I do think Yotsuba is this really great, idealized, joyful encapsulation of what it can be to have children. Is there anything that you noticed when you were reading it that maybe seemed a bit off to you, or a bit foreign to you, or doesn't quite match in your head with your experience as a parent?
Something that seems off to me. Do you have something in mind that you're trying to lead me into? I don't know.
Yes, I am. Sorry.
Are we going to talk about Fuka here?
So we're not going to talk about Fuka yet. There was something else before we got to that, but we are going to get to Fuka. Don't you worry. I often wonder about the level of, I think this is also a cultural thing in Japan, because Japan's so safe. But the thing that kind of struck out to me a little bit is the level of freedom Yotsuba has in her day-to-day. And the representation of childhood in this manga is very much out the door, off you go. You're 6, but you'll be fine, and I'll see you by the end of the day. And that navigation of a child's safety versus kind of exposing them to the real world. And I was wondering what you thought about that. It's kind of where I was kind of trying to go there.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because this is actually just yesterday I was talking to a friend about this who's also reading Yotsuba, because we were both like reading it and thinking, he's kind of absent. Like, he's a little bit of an absentee father. He loves her and he has a lot of responsibilities, and I'm sympathetic of being a single dad is hard, and all the prerequisites, but also like he'll stay up all night working, and then as soon as she wakes up, crash, and she'll like make art on his face for a little while and then just go run around the streets. And there are times where he's working all day, she's running the streets, and he's like, yeah, I don't really know where she is. Sometimes she runs. And I'm just like, that couldn't be me. If my kids are outside, even the neighbors that I know and trust, I'm like, if you're outside with the other neighbor kids, the teenage neighbor kids, I need to be out there too, just to be sure, just to be sure that everything's good. And maybe I'm overprotective, but I don't think I am. And so I am curious, is this more of a cultural thing? Because it does seem very jarring to me.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of both. And I've been trying to think about this a lot. So in Japan, it does seem to be, from what, and take all of this with a bucket full of salt. Remember, put the bucket of salt like here. Because I've experienced raising a child in Japan, but kind of Western style as opposed to Japanese style. But it does seem to be a lot more freedom with what children are okay with. So, for example, walking to school. A lot of quite young children, it seems here, will sort of just take the train to school by themselves. We're talking early elementary school. or they'll just kind of walk the 15-minute walk to school, and it's kind of seen as okay because Japan's very safe. So there does seem to be that element to it. At the same time, it was the same. There's two moments in Yotsuba that sort of spring to mind in volumes 1 to 4. The first one is what you just said, that Koiwai, the father, he crashes and he's like, right, Dad is going to go to sleep for 3 days now and try not to get in trouble. And then everyone's just like, yeah, it's fine. And that representation is pretty jarring. Pretty jarring.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the other one, it seems to come and go in the text, right? Because there's the other scene where they're at the festival and Yotsuba, is this in volumes 1 to 4?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, where the dad says to Yotsuba, now be careful, there's lots of people here, and there's an interesting line that he says, which I take issue with as a parent. If you disappear, you're never going to see me again. And I think there's a lot to be said as well about representation of parenthood in Yotsuba, about some of the language that the father uses to the child. Mostly positive, but there's one or two moments I'm like, ooh, I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
But in this section, suddenly it is very important that the Yotsuba is kept safe and kept what's the word, a close eye on. That's legitimate, and I think that's a good approach. But at the same time, I'm like, you're not the same man who, in volumes 1 to 3, who lets your child merrily skip into traffic, it feels like, or walk down the street to buy a cake. And I wonder as well if this is maybe a difference, because I think Yotsuba, I could check this right now, but I'm not going to because I'm lazy. I think Yotsuba came out maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, that first volume. And I also wonder if there's a slight generational shift here. Because I remember as a kid saying to my mum, right, I'll see you in 4 hours, and I would go skipping off into the woods in Scotland.
Sure.
In a very Enid Blyton kind of way. So I wonder if there's maybe it's not a cultural gap, although there is, as much as also a generational gap. But it's something that persists, and it's something that does come up later with Yotsuba and the level of freedom she has. And I was quite curious to pick your brain over it.
No, that's a good point. I think back to my childhood, and I think still, like, I was allowed to roam our property, and I lived out in the country. I didn't live in a city. So I was free to roam the area, but if ever we went to a place that was more populated, then it was stay close by me, make sure I can see you at all times, always check in, make sure you're with people, that sort of thing. So I wonder if some of that is also a factor, because she's in her small area that seems relatively quiet and safe. It's not this bustling, city. I'm sure it's a city, but it's not downtown area or this big festival. And it seems that in a place of this huge crowds, where probably a lot of people from a lot of different areas are all convening together, and it's easy for her to get lost in the shuffle rather than in this quiet neighborhood, maybe that's too where some of the protection comes from.
I had an incident. I'm going to tell a personal anecdote here.
Do it.
Where I went to Cairo it was just me and my boy. We went to, and he's 4. He just turned 4, and we spent a week in Cairo together. And it was this because we used to live in Kuwait, and it's a pretty cheap, easy flight, and we had some days, and so I had this wonderful week with my son. And he decided to play hide and seek in Cairo International Airport. Oh my goodness! Okay, I had about 3 minutes. So he just decided he loves hide and seek, and he's actually a very wonderful, kind, gentle boy. But for whatever reason, he's like, this is the perfect opportunity.
This is the time.
So we'd gone through security, and there was multiple levels of security. So we were sort of in the gate. It wasn't awful. We were kind of in like a little secluded barrier. And I told him to go first. I then go through the gate, and literally, I'm going to sound like a terrible parent on the internet, but that's fine. I'll own it. I turn around, I pick up my bag, I swing the bag round, and he's gone. He's gone like that in about 5 to 10 seconds. And my first thought was, well, oh no. Uh-huh. The second thought is, don't panic. And the third thought was panic. So I immediately, so I did that thing where I stand very straight and I take a breath. And I'm like, I know what's happened. He's playing hide and seek. And I just walked down, it must have been about 50 to 100 meters. And just literally just passing like all these people in the airport, just ducking down under their chairs to see him. And eventually, after about 2.5 minutes, I found him. And he was there like,
that's a long time when you think your kid's gone.
Oh my goodness. See, we were to sit here in silence. We won't do this, but if we were to sit here in silence for 2.5 minutes, you would feel that 2.5 minutes like a chasm just because of the awkwardness of like radio silence. Magnify that tenfold. And that's what it was awful. And then I found him, and he's like, "You found me." I'm like, "Don't do that again."
Yeah.
But when I was reading this section, I was like, this was the first thing that came to my mind. Yotsuba going away, and I'm like, I wonder if it's a generational thing. I wonder if it's also a mobile phone thing. The fact that we're so interconnected these days in a way maybe we weren't 20, 25 years ago, what have you. And that is also another reason we're so aware of the hyperconnectedness. When it goes away, we feel a little bit more, what's the word, helpless almost.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. That probably plays a factor as well. I've had very few instances similar to what you've expressed, but I have had a couple. One in particular, when we were in a city that I was not familiar with, we were in a gas station that was a little bit dodgy on a road trip. It was just me and my two kids. And my daughter, I always start with expectations. When we're in a foreign situation, like this is not our norm. I always, before we get out of the car, expectations. Stay by me, make sure you're communicating, stay together, like all these things. We did the expectations. My daughter is 5, and they don't always think. And so we go into this gas station. I've got them each by me. I'm on a mission. I'm trying to handle what I need to handle. And she sees some sweets. She loves sweets. She just went around the corner and was browsing the sweets. And I look, and she's not there. And I've experienced that a couple of times where that 2.5 minutes, it's like,
your heart stops.
It's not just that it's really long, but it's also that those 2.5 minutes are like, it's like when all the adrenaline in your body is being activated, and it's like nothing, you can't think through it totally. You're in a total panic, but you're trying to stay calm so that you can handle the situation.
Yeah.
And then once you finally do have the child, it's like this coming down of like, you're exhausted now and still frazzled and still shaking for hours afterward, because for those 2.5 minutes, your child was gone, like that's so terrifying. And so I do agree with you, your point of like, hey, if you separate from me, you will never see me again. A little bit much. But at the same time, he's using it as a teaching moment to help her see in a safe way, in a way that he can monitor, to help her see if you do separate from me, if you do, go off and look at the sweets, then the separation is real and it's scary and it's looming. And helping a child to actually see that. My son has experienced that where I lost him at one point. Great parenting opportunity conversations we're having, but I lost him at one point just for a short time. It was in a grocery store. We found him. But since then, he is like real careful about not wandering, because he experienced the fear and doesn't want to ever experience that again. My daughter, she's still like sweets.
It's something about daughters. But it's also like, it's when you find them again and you are panicking and you want to just cuddle them and be like, I'm so glad I found you, my child. And also you are raging. You are so furious because of the tumult you've just gone through and the potentially dangerous repercussions. I do think that's something that Yotsuba handles very well, is that balance between joy and responsibility. But I do think there were a couple of moments where it starts to fray, and I do wonder if that's Japanese culture. But hey, do you want to open the can of worms? Is it a can of worms or an elephant in the room? It's sort of like an elephant in a can of worms. Shall we talk about Fuka and some of the awkwardness? Because what happened was, when you were reading these volumes, oh, you don't mind me saying, you just sent me one of the panels, and you just said "ew," I think was what you said. Would that be fair? Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. So Fuka's kind of the punching bag. Poor sweet Fuka. She's so sweet. She's so good to Yotsuba. She has such a tender heart, but she's the punching bag of the series. And so it's like, Fuka can't draw. That's her. Yeah. Fuka can't draw. She really is bad, huh? Or she's the ugly sister, or you have really
she's
big
called the ugly sister at one point, isn't she? The not pretty one. Yeah.
She's the not pretty one. That's how she's introduced. Or Yotsuba telling her, you have really fat thighs. You're kind of fat, huh? Like, just like, poor Fuka is the punching bag. And one of the jokes that ends up being a part of this set of the Fuka motif is, I don't know, hitting on her or joking about, sexualizing her while she's in a swimsuit. And still calling her fat.
Sorry to interrupt you, Merphy. How old is she? She's middle school. right? 15,
I
something
actually
like
don't
that.
know how old she is.
Mid-teens was my reading.
Yeah,
Sorry to
probably
interrupt.
so.
Yeah.
I don't know because her older sister, I think, is like just out of high school is the way I took it.
Mm.
So certainly young. But there's this whole like, you know what, you do look good in a swimsuit. Let's joking about it and teasing her about it, and it's a common occurrence within manga that is just distasteful every time.
I'm just doing the 2.5 minutes of radio silence so everyone knows how. No, I'm just kidding. I totally agree. Now you have more manga under your belt than I do, which is why I kind of invited you to take the jump on that. It's also because I'm a coward, and I can just do a lot. But there's a Yotsuba for me is the most joyful manga ever, and it continues to be so. It persists being so. But there are several moments on the page, especially regarding the sexualization of who is essentially, not essentially, like I just Googled it as well, 16-year-old. And when Fuka comes up on the page, and I don't mind so much of some of the punchlines. So have you got to the newspaper bit yet?
Yes.
Yes. So I found that quite funny. The fact that Yotsuba, I guess it's tied back into Yotsuba, the Yotsuba makes a newspaper telling everyone that Fuka has fallen out of love with her, the person she has a crush on. That's great. I don't mind that. But there's also the analogy I keep thinking of when I see some of this stuff is Meg from Family Guy.
Oh
And
yeah.
and that's kind of how it feels to me, but especially when it's stuff about almost like the adults talking about Fuka in a certain way. I can't lie, it does sully the experience for me to some extent. And I'm trying to work out to what extent it sullies the experience for me.
Yeah.
For
I
you,
mean,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna pass it back to you. Like for you, I mean, you again with much more manga under your belt, and you assure me that it's this is a drop in the ocean compared to some representations. But when you encounter stuff like this in manga, I don't even know how to phrase this question. Like, how much of it do we tolerate, and how much of it is there an extent to which maybe we should just kind of close the page at that point? And what is that
Oh,
point? That's
sure.
a big question.
Oh yeah, I've had series where I've just closed the page,
Mm.
because some series take it really far as like adults sexualizing or getting into relationships with minors, or some series take it way far. And there have definitely been series that I'm like, nah, I just don't want to be. I don't want this. Like this feels gross. Kids are reading this. Kids are being normalized to this. I'm not interested. I don't want to consume this. For Yotsuba, it feels more like this is the norm within this type of media, and so it's thrown in there as some garnish. It's just thrown in there as like a little bit of here's a joke, here's a joke, here's a joke, here's a joke. It's normal to make these jokes, haha, let's all laugh together. And like, I'm just not laughing. Like, it's just not funny to me.
I think there's a it's I guess the reason I find it so unfortunate in a way that I find it doesn't seem to sting as much is that when you have a manga that is all about the representation of how joyful it is to experience children, just in general, Phil, I mean Yotsuba obviously, but there's other children in this. This one joke is I do find it a bit of a sticking point. So when you texted me and said "ew," I kind of went yeah, yeah, and that's kind of how that conversation went. And I think it's a conversation worth having. One thing I will say about this, having a kind of cursory knowledge of the Yotsuba fan base, is they seem to be quite aware. What I find, I don't know if you would agree with this or disagree with this, usually the darker the fiction, the more lovely and positive the fan base. I don't know if you've experienced that. The darker the work is, the more the fan base tends to be quite lovely and accepting. But I do find Yotsuba to be the exception to that, because you have this.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, what are you saying about the Yotsuba fandom?
They're all sitting there singing Evanescence. No, like it's they do seem to understand, generally speaking, that this section of Yotsuba is not something that is particularly great or tasteful. And so what I tend to find with the Yotsuba fan base is they just say, yes, this stuff ain't great, but the rest of it is so positive.
Yeah.
So there is that.
That's great. I think that's surprising to me because the Yotsuba fandom is so big, and my experience has been more I don't know that I've had, so my experience is more along the lines of if it's a small community, then the fandom is awesome. And if it's a large community, then you get all types. And so I would expect the Yotsuba fandom to be more that way. But then again, since Yotsuba is so charming and so slice of life and embracing the love of life, I definitely understand how people are just like, just love this thing that I love.
Yeah. One thing I said I've got one more question for you in a second, but one thing I genuinely love about Yotsuba, and I think I said this in my kind of Yotsuba, whatever I want to call that video, I love how there are certain panels, I think this is very skillfully done, where it feels as though you are seeing things through both eyes at the same time. And I think it's just it's so wonderfully, it's such a wonderful visual articulation of parenthood. Where again, if we go back to the flying up the top of the stairs in Volume 1, I promise we've read beyond Volume 1, but Volume 1 there's lots of good stuff. But they get to the top of the stairs and they both look out over the city. And Yotsuba goes, I can see my house from here, and Koiwai goes, no, it's that way. But when you see that picture, that kind of wondrous, almost like view of the town, you feel like you're seeing it from both their perspectives, and that kind of almost like you're seeing it through their shared bond, which I think is just the most lovely thing. But I want to ask you one more question, because I know that Yotsuba is also like it's from the parents' perspective, but also Yotsuba, and we haven't mentioned this previously, Yotsuba is an adopted child that Koiwai has adoped Yotsuba. It seems as though
found,
from Hawaii,
or I don't know. It's very nebulous.
It's like we don't really know. She's there.
She's here.
And and we're not quite sure where it's from. I mean, it seems to me that the intimation is like Hawaii, maybe somewhere from the West. And the whole conversation, to be honest, about Yotsuba, not just growing up, but kind of growing up and also being kind of culturally assimilated into Japan. But we can save that for another time, because I wanted to ask you, how was your experience with yourself with an adopted child? How did you find that representation, as slight as it is so far, in the series?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, as you said, it's very slight. It's mentioned here and there, and for Yotsuba, it's just like, yeah, this is what, it's just like, it's nothing for her. And it seems to be the same for the dad. As far as like how it's represented, there's not a lot of discussion of it, which, I mean, I guess in that case, it feels like blink and you miss it, which I think is true for a lot, ideally for adoptive families. That, like, for me personally, I don't really think about the fact that my daughter is adopted hardly at all, because she's my daughter, there's no distinction for me between my two children. They're just my children. And for, I understand if you've never adopted, how it can feel like, like how does that work? How does that mesh? Like, how does this child fit into your family? And the answer is, it's my kid. It fits in my family just as much as the other kid does, and she's my daughter. She's my shadow. She's my mini me. Everything I'm doing, she must be doing. Our personalities are super similar. Everyone that knew me as a child is always like, she's exactly like you were as a child. Like, it's the same. And so in that way, the series is just like, yeah, this is his kid. What, in that kind of sense, which is my experience. But also, we're very, very open. Like, we don't hide adoption. Adoption isn't shameful. There's nothing wrong. Like, there's no lying happening. It's just like, yes, you're adopted. Like, it's just part of the conversation, and she knows it, and everybody knows it, and it's nothing. And it seems like that's the way they treat it too, where Yotsuba's like, yeah, I'm from Hawaii. What, you want to go find some bugs? Like, what? Like, it's just like, it's normal, which is very, very similar to our household as well.
I mean, the only kind of awkward, prickly moment that I can think of in the first few volumes is when, I forget who it was, Jumbo kind of puts his foot in it, or he feels embarrassed in a way that Yotsuba is not, which I think is a really great way of having it. She's like, yeah, I'm from over there. What's your point? And everyone else is kind of
experienced that.
Yeah.
So many times when adoption comes up, like, people will be like, is it okay if I ask questions? Or, I mean, is this sensitive? And I'm just like, no, there's nothing shameful about this. Ask whatever you want. It doesn't matter. This is a good thing. Adoption is a beautiful thing. So yes, let's talk about it. But there is this awkwardness of like, am I allowed to tread this ground? Or apologetic, like, oh, I'm so sorry. And it's like, no, there's
Interesting.
nothing to apologize over.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. And you know what? I think that's probably quite a good place to close things off. Yotsuba versus Guts. Who would win in a fight?
Yotsuba.
Yotsuba versus Anamander Rake. Who would win in a fight?
Boy. Yotsuba. It's just that they would look at her. I mean, well, Rake's a little bit harder. See, Guts is easy because he has a soft spot for children. And so he's going to look at her and he's going to be like, obviously, I'm not swinging this sword.
There are some really good panels of just like, and I know that it's there to kind of manipulate you into going, oh, but it does manipulate me into going, oh. I just, yeah. Look, tell me that girl would not. Can you see that? She's coming for Anamander and she's going to win.
Right, but oldest sister, and we never talked about her, so quick shout out to oldest sister, the pretty one, as everyone likes to call her. What's her name?
Asagi.
She gets Yotsuba. Like, she's the oldest one, and yet she plays along with the shenanigans. She gets her fireworks as a thank you. If there's a water gun fight and Yotsuba's going around sniping people, she is ahead of the game and she can overpower and like get the gun and, you know, like handle the situation. She plays along in such an older sister way. I love her so much.
I think you can tell a lot about someone from the way they kind of immediately react to stuff like that. I was walking down the street like yesterday, and this little kid just comes up to me and he goes, I guess because it's foreigner, he just wants to practice his English. So he just comes up to me and he goes, strawberry. And I kind of look at him and I go, orange. And he goes, lemon. And I go, banana. It was just a 30-second conversation. But there's something like when, again, it kind of goes back to what we were saying about the father and the child playing together. There's something quite nice when you kind of embrace that side of it and you are willing to kind of continue that playful streak when things get busy with to-do lists and adult stuff and banks. And I think that's why I love the series so much. So, Merphy, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. And I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.